Well, good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
We're continuing our Jonah series, but as fate would have it, I came across something this week. As I was preparing for the sermon, I was in the office and I was like, do you know what? I need to listen to some music, but my speakers weren't loud enough, so I go through the closets and I'm rummaging through trying to find some computer speakers. But what instead do I find? Well, I find the story of Jonah, right? But it is in a child's book, and it's a little flip one. You see, you can even flip the little opens. Yeah, it's kind of cool, right? But it's amazing as I recap the story of Jonah, and I look at this little children's book, you see, it retells the story of Jonah perfectly, right? Hey, here's Jonah. He's afraid of God. So what does he do? He runs away. And he runs and there's smiles on these people's faces. Oh, and he gets to this little dock where there's some fishermen and he's going to get on and everything is going to go well. And, look they're even waving him goodbye. Such a happy tale, right? And suddenly a storm comes. Oh no, Jonah's afraid. And so what do? But they throw Jonah overboard. Oh no! But guess what? There's a whale, and it comes, look at the whale's even smiling. It's kind of hard, right? And so the whale comes and saves Jonah, and Jonah prays to God, and he washes up on shore. The whale's still smiling as he lands on shore, and he goes to Nineveh, and all the people in Nineveh were happy to see him, and everyone was merry. And then surprisingly, the story ends, and that's it. But you know what? There's not just 3 chapters to Jonah, there's 4. There's a whole nother chapter of the book which they left out. Why is that? Well, because Jonah chapter 4 is ugly. It deals with a topic that we like to avoid. It deals with a topic that when we wrestle with it too much, sometimes we can be hurt by it. It's something that's difficult to understand. Something we don't like to talk about. And so what is that? Well, today we're going to be talking about anger, and specifically anger with God. Jonah was angry with God in Jonah chapter 4. That is not a fun topic, but it is what the Lord has given us for this morning, so that's what we're going to talk about. Now, I briefly just recovered the story of Jonah. He went to Nineveh, right, just like God had told him to do, and he basically proclaimed the message God gave him, and the people of Nineveh believed God, and they were saved. But let's take a look. This is our passage for this morning. It says, "But it displeased Jonah exceedingly, and he was angry. And he prayed to the Lord and said, 'O Lord, is this not what I said when I was yet in my country? That is why I made haste to flee to Tarshish, for I knew that you are a gracious God and merciful, slow to anger and abounding in steadfast love, and relenting from disaster. Therefore now, O Lord, please take my life from me, for it is better for me to die than to live.' And the Lord said, 'Do you do well to be angry?'" So right now, I just want to focus on verse 1. It says, "But it displeased Jonah exceedingly, and he was angry." Why was Jonah so angry at God? Didn't God just do a great thing? He just saved the city of Nineveh. Now, if you're here last week, we learned briefly that Nineveh was the enemy of Israel, and Jonah was the prophet to Israel. But think about this. What is Jonah's mission as a prophet? What does he want? Jonah grew up in Israel. He loves these people, right? What has he been trying to do with them? He's been trying to proclaim the word of God to these people. He knows them. He has relationships with the city, with the nation of Israel. But do you know what's amazing is when you turn to 2 Kings, this is chapter 14, and you look and you actually see Jonah in there. But do you know what's amazing is that the people at that time didn't listen to Jonah. In fact, they didn't come to know the Lord. In fact, they insisted on their evil way. So this nation, Israel, that Jonah was working so hard to try to save, these people that he loved, weren't believing in God like he wanted them to. So what does God do instead? Jonah, go to Nineveh and save them. And Jonah is reluctant to do so. Why? Who were these Ninevites? Well, I think about them just a little bit. And as you look through history, you saw last week Nathan had a picture up, and it was of the Jews being put on spikes. These Assyrians were notorious for being evil, for punishing their victims. It was said that they would skin their victims alive. They were notorious for gouging out their eyes. They would take the soldiers that they defeated, they would cut off their noses and their ears, and they would send them walking back to their nation. These were people that would gather the bodies of the nation that they defeated. If they defeated a small town, they would bring the bodies and make a pile of heads outside the other nation's capital to taunt them. I kind of think of it now, many of you know I'm a military chaplain. I kind of think about what it would be like to be Jonah, to be spending these time with these people, wanting so earnestly, these Israelites, for them to know God, for them to know who he is, and they go off to war, and these people that he's cared so much come back with missing noses and missing ears because they've been tormented by these Ninevites. I can't fathom what it would be like for Jonah to be told that he has to go to Nineveh and to preach this message that way God might save his enemies. I just can't get over that fact, and sometimes it's hard for us to sense the injustice that Jonah was actually feeling. So I have a couple of examples for you this morning. I want you to imagine that you're driving down the highway. Right now, you're going a little bit faster than what the speed is, but there's this other car that is just flying by you. They're going 90. You're maybe going like 73, a little bit over. They're going 90. And out pulls the cop, and instead of pulling over the guy who's going 90, he pulls over you. I want you to imagine that you have a family member who is disabled or is very old, and you are trying to take care of them. They don't have a lot of money because they can't work and they're living off government subsidies. And as you're trying to help them, you're giving money, you're giving your time, the government cuts the subsidies that is helping them. And instead, it issues tax breaks to rich companies who have high-paying executives. Imagine that. I want you to imagine that you're in a marriage. Imagine that you are in a marriage and everything begins to fall apart. That it's not your fault, that you plead with your spouse and you say, listen, I'll do anything. I know I've made mistakes, but guess what? I love you. I'm willing to try to work this out. And your spouse says, no, you're not good enough. And they leave you. And years down the road, what do you see? But you see your spouse with their new significant other. And they're happy. And they're in church. And suddenly they have somehow come to know the Lord. And they have a happy family. Meanwhile, you're here, absolutely bitter, torn up over what they did to you. I want you to imagine that you are a parent of a young daughter. And as she goes to school, she meets this other girl who is constantly belittling her. Says, your hair is not long enough. You're not pretty. No one likes brown eyes. And your daughter grows up hearing this. She comes home crying. This is your daughter who you care so earnestly about, that you've been praying for, and all you want is for her to know that God loves her. But instead, because she keeps getting confronted by this bully at school, she breaks down and she starts turning to things that satisfy her other than God. In fact, her daughter never comes to know the Lord, but she goes off and is embraced in drugs and sex and things that are unfulfilling. But guess what? One day you see her bully come in, and she sits at the church, and she comes down to the pew and says, Lord, I'm sorry for all that I've done. I want to know you. This is the very person that hurt you, that hurt your daughter. Are you going to be okay with this? It is so hard to grasp why Jonah is so angry, this absolute injustice that he feels. And how do we get over that? But I want to move towards something. And I want you to see something, that it's not just injustice that Jonah is upset about. It's not just injustice that gets Jonah to the point of being so angry that he'd rather die. There's something more about this. And it's that God's involved. I want you to think about something. Was Nineveh not around before Jonah went there? Yeah, it was. Was Nineveh not already thriving? Yeah, it was. Was Jonah upset with them before? Yes, I'm sure he was. But was he the point of wishing that he was dead? No, he wasn't. Why was that? Because this time God was involved. This time God was involved in a process where he saved his enemy. Not only did God know that Nineveh was going to be saved, that this injustice was going to happen, but he chose it. Let that sink in for a second. God wanted this injustice to happen. Jonah went kicking and screaming the whole way. He didn't want to be a part of this. Guess what? He went and he tried to run from God, but God wouldn't let him run. What did he do? He put him in a whale. He sent a storm after and got him there. Jonah didn't have the option, and suddenly God is the one who's doing this injustice. He wanted this to happen. And Jonah's trying to wrestle with that, and that's what brings him to the point of anger. But I want you to see something. That's because Jonah believed in a God who was loyal to Jonah. Jonah believed in a God that would do what Jonah wanted him to do. God, you are the God of Israel. You are the God of Jonah. You're supposed to be loyal to me and what I want you to do. That's why Jonah's so devastated, because he's waking up to the reality that God has a different agenda than what Jonah wants. Are we so different? Are we really so different than Jonah in what we want out of God? You know, I think many of times it's that we think God is loyal to us. Think about this. We believe in God. Why? Well, for some of us, hey, I want wealth. Guess what? You can go down south and we'll find you a church and you will have the prosperity gospel, right? Now, maybe that's not enough. Maybe you want some instant healings. And in extreme cases, maybe you want to even be immune to snake venom. I have charismatics for you. All right? Now, if you want absolute knowledge and you want to be respected, there's a Baptist church just down the street. Now, if you want a loving community where people care for you, welcome to Mesquite, Cumberland Presbyterian Church. We're glad that you are with us. We're glad that you are here today. There will be an offering after the service. Okay, that was a joke, right? So, no, that's not how we are. But, you know, let me communicate this a little bit better. Sometimes I have to put it in American terms. You see, we have to earn what we get. We think, God, if I serve you, you will serve me. If I'm faithful to you, you will be faithful to me. God, guess what? I came to church, I read my Bible, I did all these things. Give me a spouse. God, now that I have my spouse, we're going to church together. Give us a family. Give us financial peace that we can do these. Bless my marriage. We're doing devos together. We're praying together. God, don't you see I'm faithful to you? Give me this. God, I'm continuing to do this. Give me health that I can be with them, that I can enjoy this family. Give me old age so I can be here to see my grandkids. Is that not what we believe? Is that we have this mindset that somehow by me serving God, He will serve me. By me being faithful to God, He will be faithful to me. Isn't that what Jonah believed? But guess what happens? Jonah doesn't get what he wants. And suddenly he becomes enraged. Because we have this belief that, God, if we serve you, we're going to get what we want, what will make us happy. We become enraged. Why? Because we believe in a God who wants us to be happy. And how does He want us to be happy? Well, if God wants me to be happy, He'll give me the things that make me happy. And Jonah is finding out that what he wants to make him happy and what God wants to make happy are two different things. So now he's wrestling with this predicament of, God, what is going on here? How can this be? And so he gets angry. The problem is when we get angry with God, we miss the bigger picture. We miss the bigger picture of what He's doing in our lives. I want to illustrate this with a story. I'm telling you a story of Rob and his grandfather. You see, Rob was a successful businessman. He had just began to work his way up the corporate ladder. He was really successful at everything that he had done, and he was trying so hard, putting in the extra hours at work, and he was climbing his way up. He was a busy man. He was married. He had a couple of kids. Now, one day, as he's getting home from work, he gets a call from his grandfather. Now, what's unique about Rob's grandfather is Rob's grandfather was a retired mechanic. Right? In fact, Rob's grandfather had worked at this own auto shop, which his grandfather owned, for over 40 years. He was an absolute expert, knew everything there was to know about cars. He could be in a garage and finish things in an instant. And what's even more is now that he was retired, he sold his business and he had a lot of extra money laying around. But Rob's grandfather asked him for something. He says, "Hey, Rob, my car broke. Would you be willing to come over and help me fix it?" And Rob's thinking, "Listen, grandfather, I have a lot to do. Don't you understand? I'm already working 60 hours at work every week. I have kids and my wife at home. There's other things that I really need to have done right now. You're retired and you're rich. You know everything about cars. And if you couldn't fix it, couldn't you just bring it to a shop? You have plenty of money." But Rob reluctantly goes and he helps his grandpa. And as they're there and they're working on the car, it's just not working. You see, he's getting his hands greasy. It's taking longer than he thought, and his grandfather seems to be taking his sweet time. Rob's like, "I only have so much time to do this," and he's working frequently trying to get this done. And suddenly he says, "Grandfather, this is not working." And his grandfather looks at him, "Oh, well, perhaps I ordered the wrong part." And Rob, in furious rage, says, "Grandfather, you are a retired auto mechanic. You know everything about cars. Are you this stupid? You're wasting my time." And in frustration, he leaves. And he walks out of the garage and he goes in his car. And as he's sitting there in his car, starting it up, ready to leave, what does he see but his grandpa reach down, open a box with the right part in it, and install it in a matter of minutes. And that's when it dawned on Rob that he was missing something. His grandfather didn't invite him over because he actually needed his help on the car. He invited him over because his time was limited and he wanted to spend time with his grandfather. He had missed the picture. He had missed what the purpose of him being there was all about. And that's the very case when we get angry. When we determine that we know what will make us happy, what our objectives are, we miss the bigger picture of what's going on. One of my favorite stories in the Bible, and one that I perhaps wrestle with the most, is this passage in Matthew. This is Matthew 16, and you see, Jesus had just gotten done with his disciples, and they had been preaching and preaching, and he had worked many miracles. In fact, several of them where he fed thousands of people from a couple loaves of bread. And as they get in this boat and they start to sail away, the disciples realize that they forgot to bring bread. And what does Jesus say to them? He says, "Beware of the leaven of the Pharisees." And they start thinking to themselves, "Oh no, he's angry at us because we didn't bring any bread. God's angry at us because we didn't do this." And Jesus looks at him and he says, "You of little faith. Don't you see who you are with? You're with me. I just fed these thousands of people from nothing. Do you really think that what I'm after is bread after a situation? Don't you know that I am God? These things are so small. I can give them to you. I'm concerned about something much greater. I'm concerned about things of the Spirit, things of the heart." I think of another story in the Old Testament, and it's kind of interesting. It's the story of Joseph. How many of you guys know the story of Joseph? I hope many of you do. And it's amazing to me because in the story of Joseph, we see something that moves beyond understanding. In the story of Joseph, hold on, I'm needing some water. Bear with me, please. In the story of Joseph, we see a man who is favored by his father, right? And the challenge is as Joseph goes through life, nothing seems to go his way. Absolutely nothing seems to go Joseph's way. He's betrayed by his brothers who are supposed to love him. Is that fair? When he gets and he's sold into slavery, he performs well for his master. And what happens? He gets thrown in prison. Was it fair? No, it wasn't fair. When he is in prison, a couple of guards come and he's able to interpret their dreams. And he does well to them, and they go off and they enjoy a new life. One of them does, one of them doesn't. But what has happened to Joseph? He sits there in prison. Is it fair? You see, what's interesting is as Joseph goes, something's happening. You see, his faith is being tested over and over and over again. And when he's there, finally, the Pharaoh, right, remembers him. And Joseph comes into being second in power of all of Egypt, right? And all of a sudden, his brothers, his very brothers who betrayed him, who sold him into slavery, come before Joseph. And Joseph has an opportunity. He could be absolutely enraged and angry at them for what they did. He could be angry at God for everything that's happened to him up until this point. But what does he do? And he looks at them and he says, what you meant for evil, God meant for good. What you meant for evil, God meant for good. How can this be? Because Joseph had a faith, he had a trust in God. None of this time did he ever complain. Was he ever sitting there, God, why have you done this to me? Why am I so broken? How come you're not giving me what I want? What Joseph wanted was to know that God was present in his life and that God was working. Don't think that Joseph's reward was the fact that he was able to save his family, the fact that he was made second in power of Egypt. What was Joseph's reward? He got a chance to see something greater. He got a chance to see God work in his life. He got to witness who God was. Jonah is so upset about being fair. Listen, he said, actually, I'm going to go to this. Look at this. Is this fair? Is any piece of this fair? That a God would come down as a man, would commit no crime. He would come as a human and would love on people. And the very people who he loved, the very people that he cared for, abandoned him. When chaos struck, they scattered. The very people who he was trying to proclaim his mission to chained him. They blindfolded him and punched him in the face and said, if you're God, tell us who punched you. They spit on him. They whipped his back so badly that he bled out, the point where most men would die. Is any of this fair? Is it fair that they would pierce his hands with those spikes, that he would wear that crown of thorns on a cross and pay the price for something that he never did? Is any of that fair? None of it's fair. But I have news for you. God isn't about fair. He's so much more than that. Why? Because God's love is much greater than fairness. What Christ accomplished on that cross is so much more than we could possibly fathom. And that's what Joseph is getting after in his story. He's saying all these things that we were after, they were nothing because we missed the bigger picture. We missed what God was doing, that he is a God above this. Here's what's interesting to me, is that Jonah knows this. Look at Jonah 4:2. It says, and he prayed to the Lord and said, O Lord, is this not what I said when I was yet in my country? That is why I made haste to flee to Tarshish, for I knew that you are a gracious God and merciful, slow to anger, and abounding in steadfast love, and relenting from disaster. Did Jonah know that God was greater than just simply being fair, that he was a gracious God? Yes! Jonah absolutely knew that. Why? Because what had happened to Jonah? Jonah ran away from God. He committed a great sin and he disobeyed God. God threw a storm at him. He threw him in a fish and yet God saved him. When Jonah deserved to die, God saved him. Jonah knew full well the grace of God. But how can he make this statement? If he understands that God's not about being fair, what is keeping him from being excited about what God is doing? And it's because he's so blinded by the sense of injustice, the sense of him wanting what is right. He wants a God that's loyal to him. He can't get over the fact that God is saving his enemies. He's absolutely blinded by it. I think in many ways we are too. I mean, think about this. Do you not, when you come to church, hear the story of Christ's love over and over and over again? But have we not been in Jonah's case, where somehow we find ourselves absolutely angry with God? Have we not been there? And I think it has something to do with Jonah not fully grasping the weight of this grace. When we're blinded by God, when we're blinded by what we want out of God, when we're blinded by a God who serves us, not us serving God, we miss something so much greater. I want to pull up, this is a book, J.B. Phillips. Now, I warned you, it's called Your God is Too Small. Now, I warned you about the Baptist, the prosperity gospel. I even warned you about MCPC, right? Mesquite, Cumberland Presbyterian Church. But I didn't warn you about J.B. Phillips. And he has some things that are not so nice, but it's truth. I want to read to you what he says here. He says, Such a God is, of course, in the highest degree inadequate. It is impossible for people who have persuaded themselves that God has failed to worship or serve him in any way but a grudging and perfunctory spirit. What has usually happened to such people is they have set up in their minds what they think God ought or ought not to do. And when he apparently fails to toe their particular line, they feel a sense of grievance. He goes on to say this. He says, God will inevitably appear to disappoint the man who is attempting to use him as a convenience, a prop, or a comfort for his own plans. See, Jonah's loyalty is to himself. Jonah's loyalty is to himself. He wants a God that if he serves him. I think that's so many of us, but we miss a point, and that's what leads us to this anger with God. So we're at a crossroads. We're at a crossroads as to where our loyalty lies. Are we loyal to a God who obeys us, who wants us to be happy by giving us the things that we want to be happy with? Or are we okay being loyal to a God who is working something much greater than that? I'm going to warn you, we're about to see something extremely ugly. Something nasty. What I'm about to show you is the condition of the human heart that has made the wrong choice. That is wrestling with it making the wrong choice. This is Jonah 4:3. Therefore now, O Lord, please take my life from me, for it is better for me to die than to live. Jonah is so blinded by his sense of injustice and what he wants out of God that he is not finding any peace in the fact that God is a gracious God who would save Nineveh. But our God, his ways are higher than our ways. There's only one way that we get out of this. This verse should be very familiar to you. I hope it is. It says, trust in the Lord with all your heart, and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways submit to him, and he will lead your path straight. This is not easy. What I'm telling you is of great challenge. Listen to what it says. It says, trust in the Lord with all of your heart. When you get in some of these situations where you're not getting what you want, where it doesn't seem to be unfolding the way that it should, it takes absolutely everything. It's with all of your heart that it takes. It's with great pain that you have to struggle with this trust factor. But guess what? God is working something greater. It says, and lean not on your own understanding, in all your ways submit to him. He will make your path straight. We're not leaning on our own understanding. We're leaning on an understanding that God is greater than us, that he's working something better in our lives than just simply the physical, the things that we're experiencing. He's working in our hearts, and he's giving us an understanding of who he is. When it says that he will make your path straight, he's not saying that he's going to give you what you wanted. It's not what he's saying. He's saying your paths will be straight in whose eyes? Not your own understanding, but in that of the Lord's. You should be able to find some sort of peace in that. I'm going to end with a passage here, but before I show you the passage, I want you to see something in it. I want you to understand that I'm not trying to focus on what it says to do. Rather, I'm asking the question of why. How is it that a heart could possibly do this thing? How is it that a heart would possibly be willing to have this attitude? What is it that this heart has? So here it is. This is Luke 6, 24 through 36. It says, but I say to you who hear, love your enemies. Do good to those who hate you. Bless those who curse you. Pray for those who abuse you. To the one who strikes you on the cheek, offer the other also. And for the one who takes away your cloak, do not withhold your tunic either. Give to everyone who begs from you, and from the one who takes away your goods, do not demand them back. And as you wish that others would do to you, do also to them. And if you love those who love you, what benefit is that to you? For even sinners love those who love them. And if you do good to those who do good to you, what benefit is that to you? For even the sinners do the same. And if you lend to those from whom you expect to receive, what credit is that to you? Even sinners lend to sinners to get back the same amount. But love your enemies, do good, and lend expecting nothing in return, and your reward will be great. And you will be the sons of the Most High, for he is kind to the ungrateful and to the evil, but merciful even as your Father is merciful. How does a heart get to that point? Because it's a heart that is longing for something more. It is the disciples in the boat with Jesus who were so worried about the bread, but now they understand that Jesus is working something far greater than their physical lack of bread, their lack of food, their lack of money. They have a presence with God. Guess what? They're not satisfied. This heart here is no longer satisfied with the things of this world. It's no longer made happy by the things that it thought would once make it happy. It's seeking for something greater, for something more. It's seeking for God to be revealed in the presence of no matter what it does. It's not worried if it gets offended. It's not worried if it gets beat up. Take my money. Why? Because I'm not worried about it. It's so small. Beat my body. Guess what? My God is with me. I'm not interested in those things. I'm interested in getting a chance to see God work in these other people's hearts. I'm so excited about what he is going to do and the transformation that's going to occur. It's about realizing there's something greater going on. And it longs for it. It is so excited about it. I think to the story of Jonah, and I mentioned this last time, but it's fascinating to me that Jonah would write this book. That Jonah would write this book about how awful his heart was. And even more surprising is the fact that he would bring it to Israel and they would include it in all their other books. Why would they do that? Because Jonah's realizing his story wasn't about his circumstances. His story wasn't about the fact that he was running away from God, that he was in a fish, that he saw God move a storm, and that Nineveh was saved. He is excited. He shares this story because he is fascinated with who God is and the fact that God worked through him to save not only him, but to save the Ninevites, the Assyrians. As we leave here today, I hope that we're willing to take on that challenge. I hope we're willing to sit down when you wake up in the morning and you have that coffee and ask yourself, do I believe in a God who, if I serve, he will serve me? Am I still clinging to the things that will make me happy? Or am I excited about a God who is so much greater than injustice, than giving me what I think is right? Am I excited to see him move in other people and to do something that only God can do? That's what I hope that we can leave here with today.